Hart Island, a mile-long piece of neglected real estate, purchased for $75,000 in 1868 by the city of New York. 120 acres of sand and green stretching over the end of Long Island Sound, near where the East River begins. Its neighbor, the boating-busy City Island, is thriving, now in peak summer season. But City Island has direct bridge access to the city mainland, while the only way to Hart Island is by ferry. Today it is desolate, for the most part abandoned. In fact, on Hart Island right now, the only sign of life is death. Potter's Field still occupies the northeastern third of the island, the city's cemetery for paupers and unknowns. Louisa Van Slyke was 24 when she died at Charity Hospital in 1869, and she was the first person to be buried here in Potter's Field on Hart Island. Since then, over the past 109 years or so, a total of 650,000 people have been buried in graves such as this. The coffins are buried 3 deep in trenches. When known, names are etched on the boxes, each plot carefully marked. Each year, about 150 bodies are disinterred when family or friends are able to make identification. One plot is set aside for tiny baby boxes, grim evidence of our high infant mortality rate. The babies or fetuses are all buried in one particular part of Potter's Field. The posts over here signify which hospital the infant comes from, and then each tiny pine box is lined up for each hospital.
All of these in New York.
There are 2 or 3 burial days a week here, the burial detail made up of Rikers Island inmates. Prisoners serving less than a year volunteer and earn 35 cents an hour. Inmates built the Peace Monument to the unknown dead, which dominates the Hart Island landscape. Over the decades, the scene is little changed as the same ground is recycled about every 25 years. This was a burial detail in the 40s. In those years, in fact, going back to the turn of the century, Hart Island itself was the site of a city prison.
Back in the late 50s, around 57, they had over 1,000 inmates on the island. That was the busiest time that I ever saw here. But then with the new construction down on Rikers Island, they moved everything down there.
Joseph Bartles, a chief engineer for the Department of Correction. He worked on Hart Island for more than 20 years, and his grandfather was a guard here for almost 50 years. Well, it really doesn't look like it was ever a prison.
Well, when they renovated, they never had bars on the windows. They had heavy expanded metal. Because most of the men who were up here were only doing 6 months to a year at the most. So they liked it up here. It was a good jail. You had to be in jail.
If you're locked up, this was a good place to be.
This is the best place to be.
These seats are from the old Ebbets Field. The inmates, of course, when this was a prison area, liked to play ball. They were tearing down Ebbets Field, so the warden asked to have the seats, and they ringed the field here. The bases out there are marked with old railroad ties. They were taken from the old 3rd Avenue L. Near the ball field, evidence of the Army Nike missile base, which occupied about 10 acres of Hart Island in the 50s. During that same time, some of the island buildings were also used as a shelter for homeless derelicts. By 1966, the island was no longer a city prison, and in '68, the state spent $3 million to fix up the buildings for Phoenix House. Young people in that drug program even began farming here. But the cost of up to $1 million a year for operating the ferry to and from the island became too much, and Phoenix House moved out nearly 2 years ago. Everybody who comes out here says it's really a shame that something isn't done with this place. But needless to say, with all its money problems, the city of New York isn't going to do anything. There are those, however, who do have some very specific ideas about Hart Island.
I wouldn't like to see it another drug program or a place for rehabilitated addicts or a job program. I think it should be developed in the marine nautical sense, and that's what City Island and this area, Long Island Sound, is all about.
Back in your grandfather's time, people who worked out here also lived out here.
They did, yes. They raised their families out here. Children went to school over on City Island, and they spent their whole existence, free time over here.
It was a good place to live.
Well, from the stories my aunts and uncles tell me, it was beautiful.
It was beautiful. It could be again. Roger Sharp, Channel 7, Eyewitness News.